There are 52 new insider trades filed. We looked through them all to find those handful that are high signal and can help us outperform. Let's go take a look. So this is actually one of the more boring days in insider trading land that we've had recently. Only 52 new trades coming in. Obviously, it's earnings season, so the number's going to be lower, but frankly, there just wasn't too much interesting going on. As we can see, we got up above the median percent of trades that are buys again. It gets very volatile as we're down here at such low filing numbers overall. Just a handful of more purchases, 3 or 4 more purchases in a day could shoot up the percent of trades that are buys. So a little more volatile, nothing really notable here. Just overall, like I said, kind of a very boring day in insider trading land, but we'll still go take a look to see what we can find. So we'll start with some purchases here. We'll look at the bullish returns for those insiders, look at purchases only and sort by transaction value. And then let's take a look, get this out of the way here. Solid capital management, we've looked at 100 times, buying ace of gold, continuing to buy. We can, I guess just for funsies, we can see what the chart's looking like now. Maybe gold turned around for the first time in a while there. Now, Summit Therapeutics is a stock that you probably, or you may have heard of. It's become pretty popular in kind of the retail space for a biotech company. For whatever reason, a handful of these biotech stocks just become super popular, and this is kind of one of those. Partially because they had some promising early data coming out around in China, specifically with Chinese people, but then when they moved to more Western, when they tried to run their cancer drug in more Western countries, the results weren't quite as good. So that's what this dip is, which actually wasn't a too miserable of a dip, about 25-30% or so. When the phase 3 trial came out, and they basically, at least during that trial, they didn't find any statistically significant survival rate increase for the participants. So they do have some more other ongoing studies right now going on, but that's what caused that dip. Well, actually during this dip, 2 co-CEOs bought the dip there, which is certainly notable at that time, especially that was a notable dip buy. $6 million each is a sizable. They both also have pretty good or very good historic returns. If we look at this co-CEO, 9%, 16%, 28%, 165% one-year returns with pretty good win rates. And if you look historically, if we look just a couple years ago, it bought a couple times in 2023, and then it shot up through 2024 as I assume good results came out. And then if we look back a little further, you can see just this was really his only miss was back here in May of 2021, but bought the stock down here at $1, popped up over $4, bought the stock down here just under $2, was flat for a while. Basically, that was at the beginning of 2023, and then through 2024, the stock has gone up from $2 up into the 20s. So obviously, and then this other co-CEO has virtually the same returns, a little worse because he has a few more purchases, but roughly the same, 10% 3-month, 14% 6-month, 127% 1 year, with really good win rates, and it's going to be a similar story down here of buying the stock. So overall, very, very good returns. I think this was a very high quality purchase. Now, if we take a look at the more recent purchases, we'll notice that, let's see if they tell us here, acquired in a private placement transaction. So they acquired it at $18.74 in a private placement, which is what this PRP is telling us. It's a private placement. But then if we go look at some of this private placement info here, we can see they raised $500 million at $18.74. Historically speaking, private placements, public offerings, purchase agreements, those kind of things are lower signal insider purchases. The reason this one maybe is a little higher signal than some of those is, one, you've got the insiders buying the stock, but then they specifically mention insiders that they list a whole bunch here, members of the board, blah, blah, and certain non-executive employees participated as investors, investing an aggregate of $272 million. So of that $500 million, 272 are from insiders, executives, and board members at the company. That is certainly notable because that does not happen all that often that you get that kind of insider involvement at such a massive number. So what that also means is that we're probably going to see here a bunch more filings come in as these filings for these insider purchases by, or maybe over the next couple weeks. I don't know exactly when they'll come in, but we should start to see a bunch more of those, which could mean that investors will start to pile in. It'll probably get some news. It'll probably start showing up in social media like, oh my goodness, the co-CEOs already bought, but then it'll also have the president of the board, the chief operating officer, the CFO, another member of the board, the chief accounting officer, etc. All those are going to start coming in and could get a little momentum behind the stock. Overall, I don't think the story actually is super interesting. So on kind of a long-term story standpoint, from the insider trading at least, unless you really dive into some of the biotech stuff and maybe have a different opinion, it mostly seems like they're going to try to get FDA approval, even though they didn't get statistical significance in survival rate in their trial, which normally would not go particularly well if you try to do that. But who knows? Maybe in this one case it'll work out. But they have some other 2026 stuff on the docket, some more data readouts and things that'll come in 2026, which is a little far out from right here in terms of just trying to pay attention to the insider trading signal specifically. Maybe we'll see some more purchases get closer to those dates. But if I'm just kind of looking out over the next 3 months or so, let's say, I don't see any big catalysts in the near term, but I do think we might see some, which let's just see. I wonder what it's actually up today. We might see some, so it's up 3% today. So I wouldn't be super surprised if we don't see, like I mentioned, we're going to see a bunch more of these purchases come in. So I wouldn't be super surprised if we don't see the stock up a little bit over the next week or so, just from all of those filings coming in. Longer term, like I mentioned, it's more reliant on, I think, let's see if they'll tell us where some of these other readouts are. It's obviously going to be very reliant on how some of these future readouts and trial dates go, which normally they'll tell us in here somewhere. So see, they're still going to try to submit it, even though in this quarter, normally you wouldn't, but I guess that they'll do that. But then you have a couple other, you got enrollment, you got another data readout in the back half of 2026, you have another data readout in the first half of 2027. So this is really a longer term play, which normally these insiders are going to have a longer time horizon than you and I as investors, just obviously because they're going to work there for years and years. So when you see a purchase like this, we're normally looking, which this one did work out. I mean, it went from 1860 up to 22 before now starting to fall back down over the last few days. But in the short term, I do think that the only real bet here is that all of the filings coming in will kind of get a bunch of investors interested in the stock in the short term. In the medium term, 3 to 6 months, there doesn't seem to be many hot potential catalysts on the horizon for why the stock might shoot up. But obviously the investors here have quite a bit of confidence over the long term in the company as they're putting a ton of money in. The insiders are. Next, we got a handful of purchases at Soundpoint Meridian, which I think for some reason I feel like we maybe looked at this before, but maybe not. Anyway, the CEO, not particularly great track record, only one previous purchase. You also have another insider here, the chairman, buying the stock. A little bit better of a track record, pretty good purchase here, decent timing here, kind of, I mean, not that great really, I guess. 2%, 7% over 3 months and 6 months. So it's okay. We tend to ignore these. This is just a closed-end fund, I'm pretty sure. So let's go take a look, which means they're going to pay out a huge dividend, but we don't tend to pay much attention. There's not often catalysts that are going to cause the stock to shoot up, a ton, a bunch. So yeah, it's a closed-end management company, which means, which I guess they actually won't tell me in here, but yeah, an 18.4% dividend. So if you're a dividend investor, then maybe it's worth paying attention to some of the insider purchases here. But for the sake of what I'm looking for, I want to find insiders buying the stock, hopefully with a potential catalyst that could cause the stock to go up quite a bit. And generally these closed-end funds, you're not going to have that kind of catalyst. Because of that, I immediately skip them. So that's why there's not much going on there. Simmons First National here. We've got a bank, got the chief accounting officer here buying the stock for the first time. Never bought the stock before. Decently timed sales though, kind of near the top here, nailed the top here. Not quite as good here, but then sold again 2 months later and did do quite well there. So overall, let's see, were there any other? So as those two buying the stock is down, which we do like to see insiders buying a dip. Stock is down a little bit, just a 10% or so over the last month, down a lot more over the last year, down 20%, some well-timed sales up here. So insiders do maybe a decent job of selling here. Not so much though once you look back. So it looks like they maybe just kind of got a good sale there. Let's just quickly take a look at the filing. Doesn't look like there's any notes here that we need to pay attention to. So you've got some insider buying at this, somewhere around this price, 1850 and under over the last couple of months. None of them have particularly great. It looks like this was during a public offering though. So again, we discount those public offerings and don't pay much attention. So really you've got a director buying here, and then you've got this, I don't remember what position this guy is, chief accounting officer buying for the first time here. Overall, I'd rate this like a moderate insider purchase. Nothing really too interesting. If you did want to go see, they do mention that, from a story standpoint here, it's also a bank, which tends to be a little less interesting. They're a little more convoluted to try to kind of value and figure out what's going on. Not as easy to kind of craft a story as some other industries. But if we take a look, they took a big hit here somewhere. So they're trying to clean up their balance sheet, which caused them to take a huge hit in terms of, they had to raise some money not too long ago because basically they were trying to rebalance or change, essentially restructure their balance sheet, I guess, maybe reposition it, whatever you want to call it. So because of that, it caused them a loss of about $600 million. And so when that happened, they're now able to focus on growth. So I guess, so like if you wanted to craft a story, that'd kind of be the story there. Price of $325 million public offering, and it would be used to fully retire its $330 million subordinated notes. And so then during this, they also kind of did some other stuff. It basically cost them $626 million in losses, basically right up front, but frees them up now to focus on growth. Is kind of their whole, it's kind of their whole story. So like I mentioned, not the highest signal insider purchase. I definitely wouldn't want to buy a stock that's just like kind of going straight down over the last few months like that. You'd want to see some sort of turnaround starting to happen. But again, it's a bank stock. I tend to avoid a little bit just because they tend to be more convoluted, and they also don't tend to have, big catalysts causing them to move in big directions up or down. So all of that is why I would skip this one. I don't think it's the highest signal insider purchase, but there is at least a story there of them now being able to focus on growth. And their president just resigned, so they have retired, so they have a new president coming in that'll help focus on that growth. And that's kind of the story there. Then lastly, we kind of get down. So now we're starting to get down to all pretty low. You've got dividend reinvestment here, we already looked at Rocky Mountain Chocolate yesterday, very small purchases here, a bunch of tiny purchases. Empire Petroleum, the only move here really would be, obviously oil and gas and stuff has a lot of macro factors that affect, how that will perform. But if we take a look here, he does a pretty good job buying the dips. He kind of buys every time this stock dips even a little bit, he takes a position here, and he times them pretty well in the short term. As you can see, 13% 1 month returns. And if we zoom in a little more, buying the stock during this dip from 520, 515 down to 4, buys the stock, shoots back up to 550, and then it dips down from, $5 down to $4, and then he buys the dip and it goes back up to 480, up 20%, and then now we're back down to $4 again, buying the stock again, and then we'll see, can this 20% returns or so over the next couple of weeks, can that performance repeat? I don't know. It's worked out the last couple of times, so that does make it semi-interesting, but overall his long-term track record is not good at all, down 20%, only a 30% win rate. So this one to me is like solely, it's not very interesting for a long term. I don't think he's a high enough signal insider to really pay too much attention to the long term, but as just a very short term, like 1 week trade, if you want to see, or maybe a little more, maybe 2 weeks, and just be like, hey, is he going to time it right for the third time in a row? And even historically, bought the stock down here at 5, went up to 6, bought the stock. This one was a longer term. Let's see what it did after the next 2 weeks. 525, so pretty flat over the next 2 weeks. Pretty flat here probably over, oh no, this one actually went from 493 to 563, so 15%. Maybe just be for a fun little 2 week trade. I think that could maybe work out. Let's switch over now and take a look at some sales. And in sales land, also just not a ton going on. So this is obviously part of a public offering here. 10 million shares is such a perfectly round number at $9 a share. I'm sure, well, let's see if the news will tell us here without having to click into it too much. They announced the pricing of a secondary offering. 10% owners selling during a secondary offering. I don't think there's not much there. We've seen this director selling Robinhood for quite a while. Not much signal from this guy. He's just always selling basically. A bunch of 10b5-1 plans. CoreWeave continued selling. A bunch of 10b5-1 plans. These Net Power 10% owners have been selling a couple of times now. They did time some sales pretty well, though, the stock went up 50-60% on them first before eventually falling. So it is interesting to see them selling down here. Let's see if there's any note. Nope, just looks like some open market selling here. So we tend not to pay too much attention to 10% owners all the time, but I do think it is notable that, not a very good win rate. Over the 6 months in a year, they kind of nailed all of those sales historically. So I do think that is notable, though obviously the stock has already come down quite a bit since then. It is up 100% in the last 6 months, it looks like. The power equipment industry overall has been obviously on a tear, but a lot of these companies are probably getting ahead of themselves a little bit, which we could go just see what the valuation at Net Power looks like. Don't have any earnings, it looks like, so I guess it makes it a little harder. It's not really enough history. It's kind of a wacky history here, but it looks like they're trading at a very, very expensive EV to sales multiple, even at $800 million. Let's see what their $800 million market cap, making $0. So yeah, I guess that's kind of on par with what's going on in that space. So that one actually could be interesting to look into a little bit more on the short side of things, especially now that it seems like maybe it's a little less, maybe a smidge less of a meme stock than like Oklo or some of those other power adjacent companies, or New Scale Power, some of those things. So maybe worth taking a look at. Stock is down a ton. Medium, a decent long-term signal from those insiders. Now, Delta Airlines, this one we can look at Ally real quick, and then we'll end with Delta Airlines, because that's probably the highest signal trade of the day. First insider sale by the chief HR officer at Ally Financial, or Ally Financial, however you want to say it. Overall, there's not been very much selling at all at Ally Financial, not very much trading at all. There's a pretty well-timed buy down here, and a not so well-timed sale down there. So first ever sale by this insider, selling 22% of their holdings, certainly a sizable sale, which will always catch your attention. However, Ally Financial did come out with pretty good earnings reports reports just about a week ago. So, but they had pretty good earnings reports. Some consumer finance concerns overall, I guess, but as of right now, Ali seems pretty strong. There's no group selling here. This insider doesn't really have, or doesn't at all have, a track record. So, you rate this like a 2 out of 5 or a 1 out of 5. Probably not a very interesting insider sale. John Lafter here, the chief operating officer, has never sold Delta Airlines before. Looks like he's maybe bought something one time in the past, though apparently not Delta Airlines stock. If we look at the insiders now, one thing you'll notice here is that Delta the insiders actually do a pretty good job of selling near the top. You start to see group selling. They were maybe a little early here, but then they stopped selling for a second, and then they started again at the beginning of 2025. Stock kind of fell off a cliff from $60 down to $40. Then you got the one insider buy, and now we're back up, around $60, and you're starting to see insider selling creep in again. And if we look sort of historically, selling up here, and then they stop as the stock dies, selling up here, and then they stop as the stock dies, selling up here, and then they stop as the stock dies. So, and then if we look at a better kind of chart that'll show us more the history of them, you can see the stock goes up and down, up and down, up and down. A pretty consistent pattern from the chart here, just sort of following along sort of these, the 20-day moving average there. And then when you overlay selling on top of that, you can start to see that, they go from low to high, and then all the selling starts, and then as it starts to fall again, the selling stops. And once it gets back high, selling starts again. So the insiders, it's a very, very cyclical company, and the insiders do tend to time those sales pretty well. So I think another company, they had pretty good earnings again as well. And so, maybe we're a little early in terms of the selling. We'd expect to see the selling pick up a smidge more here. Get a few more insiders selling a few more times would really kind of strengthen the case here for the stock being, near the high of where it's going to be, and then things start to turn around. If I own the stock, I guess I definitely wouldn't be interested in owning the stock at these levels, and I do actually think it's probably worth taking a look at on the short side here. If we see the stock start to break down a little bit and we see some more insider selling come in, I think it could be an interesting short. So you can go to CEOWatcher.com to find all the insider trades for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.